From Illinois, Democratic Congressman Sean Casten. Congressman, you heard the senator. I want to first get your response.
I am really concerned about what the president has opened up, and Senator Rounds is a friend, but I think we need Republicans who are willing to stand up and defend Congress to make sure that we continue to be a co-equal branch and not just rubber stamp everything Trump does. There's a huge sequence problem here. In the last week, we've had the Director of National Intelligence say that there are nuclear powers are fomenting war. That's Tulsi Gabbard. We've had the Acting Director of NSA, Marco Rubio, suggest that the United States had no involvement in the Israeli attack on Iran. I think a lot of us were wondering what Israel's strategy was in attacking Iran, because Israel does not have the weapons to go after the Fordo compound. If, in fact, as Netanyahu said, the purpose was to eliminate their nuclear capacity, how were they going to do that without bringing the United States on board? And when Trump suggested that he disagreed with his Director of National Intelligence, that he disagreed with his National Security Advisor, one does wonder on what basis was that decision being made. And, maybe there were good reasons, but, we knew when Israel attacked Natanz that Iran had enriched uranium. We knew that they did not have the capability to put that uranium on a warhead or a delivery system. And while none of us want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, this was not an imminent threat. We knew as recently as, I think, 3 days ago, we were notified that Congress would have a bipartisan classified briefing this coming Tuesday on the situation in Israel and Iran. And then the attack came overnight. Congress was left in the dark on this. It is not at all clear that there was an imminent threat to the United States. But if what happened was Netanyahu just played Trump like a fine violin, that would be consistent with the sequence we've seen. And I'm not saying I know that. I'm saying that if we as Congress don't say we need to get to the bottom of what happened, why did this happen, what was the sequence, was there an imminent threat, and those of us who are not 79 years old, like the president is, are going to potentially be left cleaning up a massive mess from destabilizing the Middle East. And I'd like to know if that was in the United States' national interest and on what basis that was made, if it wasn't made in consultation with our intelligence experts.
So, Congressman, I certainly take your point, but hasn't that horse sort of already left the barn in the sense that Congress has been giving away its authority on these matters for a long time? You don't have to go all the way back to Vietnam. You have the 2001 authorization, the very open-ended authorization of force, and doesn't the administration have plenty of legal and constitutional cover here based on what Congress has ceded in the past 2 or 3 generations?
We can choose to learn from our mistakes, or we can choose to repeat them. We spent 18 years in Iraq on false intelligence and a bad series of decisions by Congress. I don't feel myself compelled to repeat that mistake. I remain deeply concerned that we have 40,000 troops in the region, 10,000 just in Qatar. I remain deeply concerned that Iran continues to have proxies throughout the region, could massively, whether through the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, their militias in Iraq, could create a significant problem and threat to both U.S. troops and our allies, could massively destabilize shipping lanes in the region and oil prices. And last time I checked, when the U.S. overturned a military regime in Iran some 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it didn't work out real well for the United States. When we essentially turned Iraq into a failed state, it didn't work out real well for the United States. So
we heard the defense secretary and the
Congress
chairman
should step up and exercise powers, but why aren't we?
So when we hear the defense secretary and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying that they absolutely don't want to topple the government, that that's not their aim, do you not believe them?
Look, I have real questions. The Secretary of Defense never rose above the level of major. I don't think he ever managed more than 25 people before becoming the Secretary of Defense. He has a habit of leaking intelligence to family members and journalists. This is not someone who I innately trust. It's a problem with the Trump administration that we have to ask these questions. But if they had the information that justified this strike, why didn't they read Congress in beforehand? Right?
If
sunlight
Iran
is the
does
best
decide,
disinfectant. We can have that conversation in classified briefing.
you said about the consequences potentially from Iran if they do decide to target the service members in the region. If that happens, regardless of how you think we got into it, how should the U.S. respond if Iran does target U.S. forces?
I think we're going to have to play out that hand as it gets rolled. We just have to know that we initiated the play. I think historically Iran has acted through proxies where there was some plausible deniability. One presumes that if this was to go forward, it would happen in a similar fashion. You know, if you're attacked by the Houthis, do we know that the Iranians behind that? If we see more disruptions from Iraqi militias, do we know that Iran was behind that? It may well happen that it's, you know, it's incidental as well. I think we've seen some reports this morning of GPS jamming of ships in the region. What does that do to oil prices? Is that a military attack? Is it more of a commercial attack? I just think we have to be eyes wide open that there are a lot of ways this could play out that are negative to the United States, not all of which are kinetic. But we are going to have to play that hand, and I think we're struck being reminded of Colin Powell's advice many years ago, that it's the Pottery Barn rule: you break it, you own it.
Okay, I want to ask you, Congressman, a more philosophical question. It seems like the choice America faced for years and years was either a nuclear Iran or an Iran that was strong enough and wealthy enough to menace its neighbors, kill Americans from time to time, and cooperate with our adversaries in Russia and elsewhere. The Obama-era deal chose the latter with hopes of eventually nurturing reform in Iran. Given time, do you believe that Iran would have eventually evolved into a responsible citizen of the world?
Well, I'd first like to channel Marco Rubio from a week ago that the United States bias is to prefer a diplomatic solution. That was the words of the United States Secretary of State a week ago. I don't know why that changed. Clearly, look, the JCPOA that Obama negotiated had the support of all of our allies. The trade with Iran was that we're going to give you massively intensive inspections of your nuclear program in exchange for some lifting of sanctions. Much of what we know about the enrichment at Fordow, the progress of their program, was because of that inspections program. That, as you and your viewers know, Donald Trump in his first term pulled us out of that program and implemented under Secretary Pompeo this theory of maximum pressure to dissuade Iran. The fact that we're here today suggests that that strategy didn't work. I speak for all of us. None of us want Iran to have a nuclear bomb. The question is whether diplomatic pressure would have been better than military pressure. And on the diplomatic side, we at least know that we can manage some of the incremental decisions. Having now bombed this facility, and look, maybe in the fullness of time, we'll find out that that was the right decision. We didn't have the information to do it at the time. Our intelligence officials didn't know we had the information at the time. But we have now unleashed a Pandora's box of challenges of what's going to happen with Iran, with Israel. Open question with the Saudis. The Saudis are no friends of Iran. We saw when Iraq fell, all of a sudden one of the checks on Iran's power was gone, and Iran could start exercising their influence, negative influence, over the Israelis. Well, what happens if we destabilize this other piece? We got to be eyes wide open about the risks that we're going into here.
Okay, Congressman, thank you. If you were from Glen Ellen, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Congressman Sean Casten.